looks like it's about 3 o'clock. I'm just going to wait another moment, see if anybody else arrives. Hello and welcome to the Why and How of Online Captioning webinar. I'm Sarah Murphy and I'm here with my colleague Sam Cartsos. We'll get started momentarily. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and let you know that you're in listen-only mode to reduce background noise. Please take advantage of the chat feature in the webinar by sending questions and comments as we go. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation, or one of our moderators will reply directly, but we will try our best to respond to everyone. Please don't hesitate to contact us with any additional questions at the end of our presentation. Our contact information will also be available at the end. Finally, this webcast is being recorded. We will be archiving our webinar and we will email it to you when it is ready. Through our live captioning tool, Recapped, you can access live captions of this webinar in a dedicated web page by following this URL. Let me show it to you really quick. Here it is. Whoops. We also sent out this link with the reminder email earlier this week. I'm going to start with a short review of terms and definitions so that we're all on the same page about what we're going to be talking about today. Today, when we talk about captions, we aren't just talking about funny images with text. We're talking about open and closed captioning that incorporate all of the elements of the audio experience. When captions automatically appear with a video and are burned in, they're considered open captions, as opposed to closed captions that can be turned on or off. Subtitles assume the viewer can hear but cannot understand the language, or the audio is not entirely clear, so the dialogue is transcribed. A transcript is a text representation of what was said. It includes sounds and additional metadata like speaker names. Once it is associated with timing of the media, it can be considered captions. As there is live and on-demand television, there are also live and on-demand captions. Live captions are delivered during a live broadcast, event, or program in real time. Offline or archive captions are created after the fact and have been edited to align perfectly with the spoken word. I'm going to turn now and talk about the benefits, about who benefits from captions. Well, everyone benefits from captions. This is a funny chart I found on the internet, but I think there's a lot of truth behind it. Captions are useful when there's background noise that makes it difficult to hear, when the volume is muted or turned down low, or if you aren't very familiar with the language. I spent some time living abroad where I was learning Spanish, which was the local language. While most of the television programming was from the US or Canada and aired in English, it had Spanish subtitles. And I was able to learn a lot of new vocabulary that I might not have encountered otherwise. The Gallaudet Research Institute estimated that 13% of people in the United States have some kind of hearing loss, with a large share being 65 or older. Based on numbers from 2003, about 38 million Americans are hard of hearing. That number has since gone up, and it's an older statistic, and our population has since aged. Here we have a chart of the growing population of people 65 and over the past century, with baby boomers coming of age to create the largest population of people 65 and older in our recent history, and this is compounded by people living longer. So to benefit the review, to review the benefits of captioning. The deaf and the hard of hearing population are able to access the auditory experience through captions. But captions benefit all of us, not just the hard of hearing. Captions help increase comprehension of learning material. They compensate for poor audio quality, background noise, or a sound-sensitive environment. Search engines also benefit from captions. On average, 1 hour of media contains 5,000 to 10,000 words of text, which, if exposed to search engines, would help in SEO. One application of captioning in the learning space is multisensory learning, which is an instructional technique that facilitates learning through stimulating different senses at the same time. For example, seeing text while hearing a spoken word. Research on multisensory learning shows that dyslexic individuals benefit when narrated text is also highlighted or captioned as it's spoken. Our SyncWords technology provides just that in a highly accurate and scalable manner. In fact, this technology has tremendous potential for the ebooks industry. When combining the visual of a written word with the auditory experience of the spoken word, many students are better able to retain information. Research shows that an experience that stimulates both auditory and visual senses has a retention rate of 68% 72 hours later, as opposed to receiving information as only text or audio alone. Subjects remembered about 10% of what was read or heard after the same time period. And when asked, 94% of MIT online students said their interactive video transcript features were useful. Now that I have covered who captions benefit, I'd like to turn to the recent and upcoming laws around captioning. This is from Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. Section 508 is a fairly broad law that requires all federal electronic and information technology to be accessible to everyone. This means that video must be closed captioned. Section 504 applies to an agency or program that receives federal funding, and under this law they cannot discriminate against individuals with disabilities, so there must be equal access to any program or activity that receives federal subsidy. Web-based communications for educational institutions and government agencies are covered by this law as well. The 21st Century Video and Communications Accessibility Act, also known as CVAA, expands closed caption requirements for all online video that previously aired on television. In January 2012, the FCC adopted rules requiring captioned programs on TV to be captioned when reshown on the Internet. These rules implement provisions of the CVAA of 2010. The CVAA follows a string of laws passed in the 80s and 90s that were designed to ensure that telephone and television services would be accessible to all Americans. But these laws were not able to keep up with the fast-paced technological changes that our society has witnessed over the past decade. The new law contains groundbreaking protections to enable people with disabilities access to broadband, digital, and mobile innovations, the emerging 21st century technologies for which the Act is named. The CVAA is divided into two broad titles or sections. This is an overview of what each title covers. And there are a series of deadlines, past and future, set out to get television content with captions available online under an aggressive timeline. So we're just going to take a quick look at those dates here. Near live video programming is defined as programming that is performed and recorded less than 24 hours before being shown on TV for the first time. Edited for Internet means the TV version has been substantially edited, for example, deleting scenes or altering musical scores. However, changing the number or duration of commercials is not considered editing for this purpose. These new rules cover full-length video programming. Video clips and outtakes are not required to be captioned when shown on the Internet. Consumer-generated media shown on the Internet is not required to be captioned unless it has been shown on TV with captions. The phasing of these requirements is timely considering the growing audience for online video content. In February of this year, the digital monitoring firm ComScore released its online video rankings, noting that 178 million Americans watch 33 billion online videos. And here we've got a pie chart of the predictions of online video bandwidth for the year 2015. And you can see the large portion of this chart is for video, online video that's previously been shown on television. And here is a graph depicting the video on demand growth predictions through 2015. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sam Cartsos. Here you go, Sam.
Thank you, Sarah, for a great synopsis of the reasons to caption your media. Access first, and foremost, but there are so many practical benefits for all kinds of users. It's a really broad topic, lots of ground to cover, so I thought I would start with my first exposure to captioning work. This was back in 2000 when I first founded Frameweld. We created some demos of our rich media technology. We shot a 13-minute video. Online video, online accessibility were nascent at that time, so I did everything by hand. Transcribed it, timed everything, coded it by hand, and considering this was 13 years ago, I think it ended up looking great. But it was a very time-consuming and painful process. It was so painful that in our first year, we started creating some tools that aided us in that process. And we haven't really stopped ever since. Captioning became an important element in the work that we did, and as we focused on it, I became more aware of the challenges and opportunities and also what constitutes quality captioning. So I'm going to focus first on offline captioning, which, as Sarah mentioned, refers to captions that you create for pre-recorded media, and I'll get back to live a little bit later on. So let's get into the how. Not just how to create captions, but how to create quality captions. There's three basic elements. You need an accurate transcript, accurate timing, and effective segmentation. So let's start with the transcript, because that's really where captions begin. Lorem ipsum text is not gonna cut it. It has a really big impact on caption quality because you can't convey the correct information in your captions if it's not correct in the transcript. So that brings us to timing. So with a great transcript in hand, you now have to sync that text to the related speech in your media. You want timings that are as accurate as possible, and you want to keep them up long enough to allow users to read them. And that takes us into segmentation, which often gets overlooked because people associate the transcript and timing work with captioning. But it's really a key aspect of quality captioning. In other words, creating captions that are friendly to users and usable. So the goal in effective segmentation is to create caption segments that are easily digestible, readable without requiring lots of effort on the part of the user. So it's a matter of chunking our text, similar to how the celery here is being chunked. So you want to keep several things in mind when it comes to segmentation. One of them is timing, right? An effective segment doesn't, for instance, span text that's spoken over a minute or several minutes or something like that. Number two is length. We're talking about digestible chunks, so you want to limit the amount of text you show at one time, typically 32 to 40 characters per line. Third is syntax, so I hope you can remember back to some of your high school English. You want to create segments with the greatest semantic load. And if you look at the two examples up here, you know, for most people, the caption segment on top gets processed much more easily than the one below, even though we've just moved a single word, fox, from the first line down to the next line. And that's because the quick brown fox is a more complete thought than the quick brown. So when we talk about creating segments with a high semantic load, we want to create segments that represent more complete thoughts. And if we have to break things across segments or across lines, we want to try to break them at the highest syntactic point. So you can think of it as creating chunks of text that are brain-friendly. And number four, related to segmentation, is proportionality. Lopsided caption segments, as we see here, are quite hard to read, even if they are broken at the highest syntactic note. So what you have in segmentation is a process of chunking text by balancing a number of factors: timing, syntax, length, and proportionality. But when you do it right, it ends up creating captions that lend themselves to easier cognitive processing, which ultimately means more usable captions for your users. Okay, so how does this all come together? Well, most captioning is handled manually. You know, going back to my earlier example, it's not that far off from what I was doing 13 years ago. And if you look at quality captioning, almost all of it is done manually. And there's many tools that aid that process. We've created a lot of those kinds of tools, but ultimately the quality depends heavily on the amount of time you invest in creating them, especially if you're looking for high quality segmentation, near perfect transcripts, frame accurate timings. You know, and of course that adds up in terms of dollars too. You know, there's captioners who will charge $500 or $800 per media hour, others that charge $100 or $200 per media hour. And you know, what you find is that captioning is time intensive, and in order to offer those cheap rates, you have to cut the effort somehow, and the quality then suffers. Which brings us to automation. So if you're like me, you're wondering, can't we introduce some technology to speed this process up, improve quality, and reduce cost? And the answer is yes, and that's really what we've been working on for the last 2 years. A platform called SyncWords, which is a labor of love to really help first and foremost create quality captioning, and also try to make that more cost-effective, more efficient, so that more organizations can provide captioning and expand access. But you have to be selective, because there's examples of fully automated captioning out there. And I'm sure many of you have seen the results on YouTube. You know, you can see captions that are laughably bad, perhaps for hearing audiences, not so funny for deaf and hard of hearing audiences. So in case you didn't catch what was the captions there, you know, the top line here, I would never lie to you about a fake Jamaican vacation. When it goes through a fully automated process, you end up with, you know, like a Jack Kerouac kind of beat poetry, weird thing going on, not really something that expands access to the media. So we looked at those three elements to see where we could develop technology to automate or partially automate that process while committing to quality. Because creating usable captions was key to what we want to achieve. You know, as we've seen, there's already many ways to generate really bad captions automatically. So where we ended up was SyncWords kind of adopted a manual approach to transcription and automation of timing and segmentation. I guess, you know, I often get the question, this will transcribe what's spoken, right? And the answer is no. We decided really early on we were not even going to try to automate that step. ASR is wonderful technology, but it's just not generating usable transcripts for captioning purposes. We were quite confident on timing, and we have some great results. When we got started, we surveyed the landscape, and we saw a lot of potential pitfalls. You know, automated timing, you know, tools, but they, you know, might require pristine audio and a verbatim transcript for usable results. You could often get like an error amplification effect where, you know, poor audio or transcript could result in some things misaligning, which then gets compounded as your clip goes on. And we were really aiming for a solution that would be usable across a broader range of use cases, because the reality is that most video and audio that gets recorded doesn't have perfect production values. And it's much more common to find video that has music and noise than not. So at this point, I'm going to actually attempt to do something more challenging than captioning. I'm going to try to type audio from my computer into this meeting so you can see some of the results. And while I'm playing this, I won't be able to speak to you. So I will just keep it short, maybe 30 or 40 seconds to give you an indication of what SyncWords can produce in terms of quality captioning. So let me switch to this audio over, and I'll be back in a minute.
When John Boehner first became Speaker after the 2010 elections, the Republicans stormed up to Capitol Hill and announced, remember this, a whole new set of rules for the House. Congress was not just changing the party in charge. They weren't just changing leadership. They said they were going to change Congress entirely as an institution. They were just not going to do things the same way anymore. Their most substantive new rule was that no longer would it be possible to pass legislation that cost money without also passing something to pay for the cost of that other thing. That was
You're gold. You're solid gold. Let's see what else we got. I like what's happening so far. Sir, stand on up here. Let's get the fellas involved. How are you?
Great. I'm very nervous.
Well, I don't want you to be, because that's what we have to get out of the way, right? We're a team. We're a team on this thing. Now, what is your name?
Eric.
Eric. That's a fantastic name. So off the bat, you're doing terrific. Now, Eric, here's a question. Have you been drinking?
No.
Okay. You plan to? Like fun night out, or I just got the ankle bracelet off? What kind of drink?
The ankle bracelet off.
Get the ankle bracelet off. Let's keep it together until then. Now, Eric, in knowing that, I have to ask.
Okay, everyone, I'm back with you, and I hope you're still with me, and you were able to see some of those clips. There's, some inherent challenges in trying to share captioning over a live meeting like this, because the audio gets piped into a call, and what you're seeing in terms of video on your screen might have a different lag, so it may not, depending on the user, it may not seem that everything is perfectly in sync, but the synchronization is very highly accurate. In terms of so I showed two examples. One was of like a Rachel Maddow clip, and then we saw something in the Saturday Night Live. When we're working with audio that's clear, sync words will generate start and end time for every word at close to 100% accuracy. But then we talked about, this broader set of use cases. So we can throw, more challenging material at it. We've taken webinars recorded under truly horrid conditions, and it does great. We throw also a lot of broadcast material, as you see with that SNL clip we looked at, with noise, music, other kinds of auditory curveballs, and it also turns out highly accurate timings, somewhere in the range of between 92 and 99% of segments. In terms of the segmentation, when we started, it was, we were very unsure. We weren't really sure how we were going to approach this and, how it would pan out. We've developed several tools that basically chop transcripts up into segments and tee them up for a user to time them, but didn't come near close to what an experienced person could do with segmentation. And a lot of that sort of like sophisticated natural language processing, we dropped it, and we implemented instead a supervised machine learning approach. And I'm happy to say that it worked out great. And our segmentation results are on par with our timing results. So under ideal conditions, we can generate highly usable caption segments for 99% of them. And when we throw more challenging broadcast material with rapid speaker changes, people talking over each other, we get a success rate of 91% or greater. And I know you're probably thinking, well, this is much more subjective. It's not a question of precision, as timing is, and that's absolutely true. So we worked with people who have a tremendous amount of experience in the captioning field, and we essentially asked them to evaluate if those segments measured up to their standards of what a person would create in terms of segmenting that content. And I'll just point out that we don't expect to stop working on this technology. A lot of work is going on to improve those scores even further when we're dealing with adverse condition. But this, ends up being our model of how we approach captioning with a high degree of quality and automation. So it's the manual transcript, automation of timing, automation of segmentation. And I'm actually going to switch over to the tool because I want to show you a few things. So let's see, there we go. Automation is a great thing, but we want to give users an easy way to review the work that SyncWords perform and make edits if they're needed. So if you're working with broadcast material and you have a 95% success rate, it's still not as good as it could be. So, you know, captioning is often like a mysterious process to organizations, and if they get feedback on the quality of captioning, often there's, you know, there's no result because there could be additional cost incurred, they're unsure what the process is. So we wanted to provide a way where users could review the work that SyncWords did. So this is basically a transcript, this is audio here, and I'm not going to pipe this. I'm not going to pipe this into the call, but this is basically a countdown, and then our audio begins here, and you can basically see on a word level how SyncWords is synchronizing the material. SyncWords also recognizes speaker labels and what we call cues, which might be like parentheticals, sort of non-speech audio that might be timed along with the rest of the media. There's also tools that allow you to make edits to all of this. So you could edit this text if there was a typo or a sentence was dropped out, you could type it in. And one of the great things about SyncWords is that it will retime a portion of your transcript on the fly so that as soon as you're done with your edit, you have a new caption file that you can upload in order to correct whatever problems you had. So, you know, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the flexibility of this approach. Because when your project is ready, you know, in SyncWords you can basically pick some options and get your captions. But since SyncWords is timing every single word, you can choose one output or you could choose 5. You could choose one, say, at like a traditional captioning length of 32 characters, one that preserves speaker labels, one that removes them. And there's a lot of sophisticated options here as well in terms of, you know, how you exactly want your users to experience captions, that kind of thing. But if we were to approach this the old-fashioned, the manual way, like many outputs, if they had different segmentation characteristics, you're looking at essentially redoing that work for each separate output that you need. In SyncWords, you only do that once when you run the project, then you have the ability to pull all kinds of outputs. You know, we're also exploring that flexibility right now and ways to leverage that. We're using the word level timings to create some karaoke style captions to basically flash some words in the segments as they're spoken. And we're also exploring word level and segmented sync of ebooks with audiobooks. And you know, as Sarah mentioned earlier, there's some great potential benefits for multisensory learners as well as dyslexic users and others when you stress that association between the written word and and what's spoken. But it also has a universal design appeal because publishers can use that information to create some innovative features. Say, a reader sort of, dropping off from reading the book and having it sort of pick up and read to them, at that point, or vice versa. So I promised to get to live captions. So let me do that because we're making headway into our time. We're using them for the webinar, for this webinar right now, and as you can see, I just pulled up, we have our live caption window, real-time captions coming in to provide access for any users who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also for all users because, again, captioning can benefit, everyone. And for this event, we're using our own live captioning platform called Recapped to get those captions to you. There's other solutions out there too, but there's a few things that are really great about Recapped. You can create a shareable URL like we have here to email or tweet out a way for people to access captions. You can access this on a mobile device. You can embed this on your own website to deliver captions there. It also speaks the language of live captioning for television. So it has lots of applications for, for media and broadcast. It can take in live captions, archive them, make them searchable. You can export transcripts as well as caption files. Lots of other features too. Too many to go into right now, but the aim is similar to SyncWords. The goal is to help organizations speed and automate as much of the process as possible while emphasizing quality. And in case you're wondering, there's no speech recognition involved. There's a very nice person on the other end, Vanna, listening and creating the real-time captions. I'll just share one more thing about Recapped, our most recent work on it, because it represents the future direction of our work, and I think it furthers the goal of greater automation and efficiency, and therefore greater access. We recently added a server API and a client API, so organizations can begin to integrate the live captioning capabilities of Recap into their own systems and their own offerings. And this is especially compelling for organizations that do a lot of captioning work. When you need an archive transcript or caption file, you don't need a user to come into Recap and click around to get it. Your system, speaks the RESTful API language and tells Recap, get me this file, post this new information, delete this event, put, an updated title on this event, things like that. And that's just for starters. It opens up a lot of exciting possibilities where we're only limited by our imagination and the modest effort that's needed to integrate. We've discussed with different organizations advertising applications, of course, transforming live captions as they come in to make them interactive, to introduce graphics and symbols that otherwise couldn't be used, to index captions as they come in to provide real-time search capabilities, and on and on. I mean, it's really just a question of what we can dream up. And it's not just relevant to recap. SyncWords also has an API. It's really entirely API driven. The way SyncWords is set up is that there's an engine in Amazon's cloud, highly scalable environment, and it does all of its communication via an API, even our own web application that we were looking at just a minute ago. So our hope going...
What languages are supported in recap?
Oh, okay. We got a question on languages supported in recap. That is a good question. So recap supports English and Western European languages because it supports certain types of character sets. So it supports accented characters. It's used regularly for captioning in Spanish. A lot of Spanish events get captioned live in recap. It doesn't at this point support other character sets like Greek, Cyrillic, or others. So just to conclude on the API, it's our hope going forward that more organizations will integrate the capabilities of recap and SyncWords into their own systems and offerings. And I'm optimistic that these tools and the possibilities they offer to make captioning easier and more cost-effective will end up making it more relevant to organizations. And ultimately, that expands the amount of captioning done, which in turn expands access for all, not to mention all of the other great benefits that Sarah addressed earlier. So I just want to thank you for your time today and for allowing me and Sarah to share our passion, our rationale and approach to captioning, as well as our tools. So you can find more information about our work at Frameweld.com, syncwords.com, recap.com, and of course, we would love it if you get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you. You can find us via email, Skype, Twitter. Okay, I see we have quite a few questions, so I am gonna just end it there. So I'd love to answer as many as I can before we conclude. Thank you very much.
Can you read this from here? Is that okay? If I just do this and I'll highlight them?
Sure.
Do you want to read the question and then answer it?
Yeah, so let me read some of the questions that I'm being given here. The question is, can you embed recap onto a front-end video player that broadcasts live streams? And are there any organizations that do this today? That's a great question. So, so one thing that I overlooked mentioning related to our APIs is that those APIs are not public yet, but they will be. And one of the goals of the API is that organizations will be able to incorporate those live captioning capabilities of recap into their own tools. And that would be very much relevant to, to your question, using the client API as each segment is, coming through recap. You can basically receive that. You could parse, transform that caption, and pass it into your video player. Maybe it's a Flash player, maybe it's an HTML5 player. There's a number of different ways that you could treat it. So the APIs will enable that kind of thing. There is nobody doing it now, but we are talking to some organizations about that. So another question. What is the possibility of synchronization of captions based on frame changes? Can timing be edited? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. So if we go back to the sync words tool, you can edit the timing of every word related to the media, right? So in sync words, you're uploading media, you're uploading a transcript. Sync words sort of marries the two, and I should mention it's quite forgiving when you have a transcript that's of poor quality. If there's misalignments between the transcript and the audio, sync words tries to find the best match for the two and avoids that problem of error amplification that I mentioned earlier. If you made a mistake and you uploaded a transcript in sync words, you can replace it with another transcript, or you could just come in here and edit the text, pick whatever text you want and then edit it and make changes. That way, what you can't do is change your media. You can't do, for example, you can't cut up your audio and then resync portions inside sync words. It assumes you have a final piece of media which is ready to be captioned, which makes a lot of sense because it's also expecting the transcript of that audio as well. So, it sort of presumes that you have a final piece of audio to work with.
It's a really good comment here. So do click it here.
Okay.
And then there's the following question.
It's a comment from Svetlana. She says, I wanted to share a comment about karaoke captioning. It would be great for those with cochlear implants to practice their hearing skills when reading a book and at the same time listening. I mean, I think that is, I think that that's a fantastic point. One of the things that I am quite interested is using the flexibility of sync words to generate multiple outputs from same piece of media and transcript in terms of captions, and then use that to actually do some research to see which small variations in captioning have the greatest benefits in terms of usability for which specific users and so forth. So I don't doubt that at all. Question. What if you want to synchronize captions based on shot changes rather than word utterances? That's a good question. So sync words doesn't consider the visuals that are in your media. So one of the things, so it's important to go over things that sync words doesn't do as well. So one, sync words will not handle placement of your captions, right? So you may have seen captioning on video may move depending on what other information is present on the screen. Sync words doesn't try anything like that. Sync words is not aware of scene changes, shot changes. Of course, if you want to change the timing of a word, you could do that, and that you could probably kind of like hack a solution for shot change editing, but that's not something that sync words is concerned or aware of at this point. Can you import timed text formats your software can export. For example, can I import an SRT and will it hold the timing? That's a good question. It does not import SRT or other caption file formats. You feed it, a transcript. You could strip all of that out and feed that in as a transcript. And again, SyncWords is concerned with generating timings at a word level, so start and end time for every word in the piece of your media. But I think I understand where you're coming from with that question. Sometimes organizations have pre-existing captions, and then as the user mentioned earlier, there may have been an edit to that piece of media. Somebody may have added, like a 5-second kind of bumper at the beginning of the clip, and now everything is off by 5 seconds. So what you can do in SyncWords to address that, there's ways where you can offset time. So if somebody added 5 seconds to the beginning of the video, you can shift everything forward by 5 seconds, or you could shift everything back by 50 milliseconds, and and so forth. But it wouldn't change timings within the clip. But I know what you're talking about, and there's some work that we've done related to that. That's just not a capability that's offered in SyncWords at this time. We have another question. Do captions and videos have enough contrast against lighter backgrounds? That's a great question. And so on my computer here, I was kind of popping up the videos we were looking at in my VLC player, and the outputs we're looking at are specifically like SRT caption files. So the way that your captions are going to display is in large part determined by the environment that they're being played in. Having said that, SyncWords provides several options related to the formatting of captions in terms of the color of the font and a background color, etc. Unfortunately, many of these caption file formats don't necessarily support all of those capabilities. So again, it's I think in large part determined by where you end up playing your captions and what support it provides for styling and formatting your captions. Another question. How can Frameweld pick up live stream captions without being at the source? And what is the delay on putting captions into an end broadcast? Okay, that's great. That's a great question. I mean, I'm guessing this is one really related to the live captioning. So I should point out, so Recapped is our technology offering. As I mentioned earlier, there's a very nice person who's actually transcribing this live, and she does not work for Frameweld. So we provide the technology solution, and the National Captioning Institute is providing the actual real-time captioning service. And typically what happens is that a captioner will dial into an event and get audio through a soundboard or whatever means is available. And I think your question implies the audio quality that live captioner receives in order to be able to accurately transcribe that real time, and that's a real issue. You know, if you just, you know, turn on your laptop mic and expect, you know, everything that's happening in a room to come through crystal clear to a real-time captioner, you know, that's not going to happen. So you have to, you know, if you, again, it's a question of putting in the effort in order to end up with a quality, usable result. You have to put in the effort to provide, you know, a clear audio connection to the captioner who's going to be transcribing that, captioning that. So we have another question. Okay, I think this is, I guess, our last one. I can't see any conventions for deaf and hard of hearing audiences apart from the labels. Do you use other conventions to visualize auditory content, since this is also intended for deaf audiences? You know what? That is a great point. So these are some short examples. You know, some small clips that, you know, we pulled together for the purpose of sharing this with you today, and you'll see, you know, when SyncWords does attempts at determining where speaker labels may show up in a transcript, so that it knows not to expect somebody to say, Christy Chambers, hello, I am Christy Chambers. It recognizes that that initial Christy Chambers is there as a speaker label indicating who's, you know, who's talking. And when it comes time to get your output, you can choose to keep those speaker labels, or you can choose to remove them. And if you remove them, then you can choose how to designate speaker changes when there's multiple people talking in one particular segment. And the way that we deliver non-spoken auditory information is through what we call cues. And, you know, you may be more familiar with it, you know, referred to like bracketed text or parentheticals, where you're describing non-speech audio. And when you're using SyncWords, you know, it treats those in a special way as well. So, you know, I could designate this, you know, instead of this being spoken text, I can say that this is a cue. It's, you know, it's non-timed text. It's, you know, something descriptive in terms of the audio. And then when it comes time to export my captions, I can choose to either keep it or remove them. And, you know, just going back to Sarah's example, you know, you might want to generate, you know, one output in SyncWords, which is 32 characters long. You know, you keep speaker labels, you keep all of your cues, you close gaps to keep your captions up, you know, for as long as possible, you know, that kind of thing, so that they're not coming off screen in between one caption to the next. But then you could also switch it around if you wanted to generate an output which is used for subtitling. You could change this around, and you could make this, say, 42 characters, and you could give it a flex limit so that it will smooth out, you know, line length and try some other combinations up to 3 additional characters, that kind of thing. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility. And, you know, I'm sorry, the examples that I've picked to show you, you know, you're right, they don't have a lot of, you know, non-speech audio included in them, but it's certainly something that is supported inside of SyncWords, and it gives you the flexibility to, you know, to manage that, you know, when you're outputting your clicks as well. So, wow, it is 4 o'clock. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. You know, we would love to hear from you. And let's go back to our contact page. So please get in touch, and we'd love to answer any other questions, and I expect that we'll go over the remainder of them and email you directly. Thanks very much. I hope everyone has a great day.
We'll be posting a video on that.
Yes, Sarah's right. We will be putting a lot of this information online, and we'll be letting you know when that's available so that you can share it, or you can go back and look over some of the elements we talked about today. Thanks, everyone.
The organizer